Welcome to another episode of the Philly Public Health Chats, where we explore important topics in health and medicine. I'm Rene Najera, Director of Public Health at the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, and today we're joined by Dr. Joseph Savino, the inaugural Abramson Family Professor of Anesthesiology at the University of Pennsylvania Health System. Dr. Savino is not only a pioneer in cardiac anesthesia, but he has also played a key role in advancing the use of transesophageal echocardiography, transforming how cardiac patients are cared for. Today, Dr. Savino will be sharing his thoughts on one of the most pressing issues facing the healthcare industry, which is the need to attract more students to medical schools. This is a crucial conversation, especially as recent projections from the Association of American Medical Colleges highlight a potential shortage of between 37,000 and 86,000 physicians by the year 2036. With growing demands on our healthcare system due in part to an aging population and just increased demand for services, our future physician workforce will be essential in addressing these challenges. Dr. Savino's own journey from a young immigrant from Italy living in Philadelphia to one of the leading voices in his field make him uniquely positioned to discuss the importance of investing in medical education and expanding opportunities for aspiring doctors. And once they do become physicians, we need to also increase the number of available residency slots. And of course, once they come out of residency, have enough jobs and enough incentives for them to take on jobs where there is need. So let's just jump right in it and have this important conversation with Dr. Joseph Savino. Hey, Dr. Savino, how are you?
I'm fine. Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining me. So let's start off with a little bit of background on you. You had a remarkable career in the field of anesthesia. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to pursue this particular specialty in medicine?
Well, I did my medical school training in Boston, and during medical school, I had certain mentors, and my mentors showed me the deep dives in anesthesia and really the perioperative care of surgical patients and the care of those patients in the intensive care units. And that was my initial exposure, and I became attracted to it. So I have to give most of the credit to the mentors and role models that I had during medical school.
Would you say that there was one pivotal moment in all of this?
No, I think it was an accumulation. I enjoyed doing things with my hands, doing procedures, and the field of anesthesiology and critical care is very procedure oriented. You get to put catheters in, you put involved with tubes and a lot of machinery, a lot of technology. And I kind of enjoyed that and I kind of embraced that. The other kind of aspect of anesthesiology and critical care is it's typically a hospital or surgery center based practice. So you tend not to have an office out in the community where you put up a shingle and have patients in the holding area. I kind of enjoyed that. I like coming to work into the hospital. And then when I leave the hospital, I like the fact that I have a life outside the hospital. So there's a demarcation between the two. And distinguishing those two, I found very attractive.
So we'll talk in a little bit about how some students might feel about medical school. Did you at any time feel overwhelmed or feel like it was too much?
Medical school was a great 4 years for me. I enjoyed it, but I will say, truthfully, there were times when I felt I was drinking from a fire hose, that I couldn't take all the water in. And I think the expectation is not, or should not be, that you take in all the information. You take in what you feel is important, what your professors feel is important, and you become a student really for the rest of your life. So you're not going to get all the information during medical school, but you get a lot of it over the medical school plus 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later. You're a student for life. So you shouldn't be discouraged if you feel you haven't assimilated all the necessary information from the get go.
So with that experience and then later on in residency and your professional career and then also as an educator, what would you say to students who feel discouraged by the rigorous application process or the long years of training that this is a lifelong commitment?
Yes, it is a lifelong commitment. And I must say, in my 4 decades of observations, I find those that enjoy being a student, if you enjoy the journey, you will be successful and I think you'll be happy and it's very rewarding. If you do not enjoy being a student, then I think you need to think it over very, very carefully because you're going to be a student for the rest of your life. You're going to be learning continuously. In terms of the rigorous application process, it is a structured process. And I would say that not everything is based on metrics that we can quantify with a number, like a GPA or an MCAT score. Every individual can distinguish themselves, and they should be able to distinguish themselves in the application process.
So speaking of MCAT and GPA and other scores, some students may find these benchmarks intimidating. How do you think we all can help prospective students understand that while scores and grades matter, they aren't the only factors that medical schools consider?
That is absolutely true. The MCAT examination, like the SAT for college, tends to be an exam that everybody takes. So it puts everybody on the same kind of database. So medical schools can compare students from the West Coast, the East Coast, from Alabama to Minnesota, because they're all taking basically the same exam, and they look at performance on that exam as a metric to determine whether the students can handle the science rigor and the rigor of the academics of medical school. However, with that being said, what makes a great physician isn't just science rigor, but it's really the total package. And the MCAT score is one or two lines in a 4-page application. So I think it really behooves the applicant to distinguish themselves. And what I really mean by that is every individual should be able to distinguish themselves. Every individual. Whether you spend your summers being the captain of the baseball team and showing leadership skills, or whether you are pumping gas at a gas station to make money to help pay for your education, those are very, very valuable qualities that medical schools look at and say, you know what? We think that person can contribute to our class. Now, if you have a high MCAT score and a high GPA, I will tell you your likelihood of being admitted or being offered a position in medical school is increased. But there are people with very good GPAs who don't get in, and there are people with low GPAs that get admitted to medical school because, again, that is not the only factor.
Hmm. So one of the factors that some students may not be able to, immediately, I guess, address would be their background or their socioeconomic status. According to the latest data from the Association of Medical Colleges, students from families with executive or professional backgrounds are more likely to apply to medical school. And this is just applying. We're not even talking about getting in compared to those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So, what do you think could be done to level the playing field and make medical education more accessible to all?
So I agree with the statement you just made that students who come from more affluent backgrounds, like you said, parents who are executives or professionals, are more likely to apply to medical school. I think many times those students have more resources because they come from an affluent background. They go to private schools, the class sizes are smaller, they have tutors. And they also, many times, their parents are physicians and they see them as role models and say, you know what, I want to be like mom or I want to be like dad, etc. Students who come from the inner city who are more challenged from a socioeconomic background may also have other external pressures. So, like you said, it's an uneven playing field, and what we can do as a society is try to increase the opportunities for those who come from socioeconomically challenged backgrounds so that they have a more of a level playing field. I think we would kid ourselves if we think we could make it absolutely level for everyone, but I think we could improve the current status quo.
And you mentioned earlier about the role of mentorship in your own development, and I'm sure that you've likely mentored your own students throughout your career. Can we talk a little bit more about that, about how you think mentorship can play a role in encouraging more students to pursue medicine?
Yes, as you know, I give a presentation on the roadmap to admission to medical school. And at two separate presentations, I thought highlighted the question you're asking. And one, a mother and her daughter came up to me afterwards and said, "You know, Dr. Savino, I thought being a doctor defined an individual within a certain set of guardrails. Like they pictured being a doctor as being a certain way. And you've really torn those guardrails down. And my daughter, who thought medicine was not for her, now thinks that it is a possibility." Another aspect on a separate experience I gave this presentation at my high school alma mater, and I put up a slide that looks at MCAT scores compared to ethnic backgrounds. And I presented MCAT scores, and this young lady raised her hand and asked me, Dr. Savino, she said, I'm looking at your slide, and it looks like the MCAT scores of blacks are lower than the MCAT scores of whites. Are we not as smart as them? And I applauded the student for having the courage to ask that question. And I said to them, the MCAT score is not a measure of intelligence. It's a measure of how well you prepare for that examination. And people who have more resources to prepare for that exam are likely to perform better. So maybe that discrepancy in score is more a factor or a function of the socioeconomic differences between those two groups rather than innate intelligence. Because again, the MCAT score is not a measure of intelligence. But I will say that diversity, I believe, despite the Supreme Court decision of recent times, I believe diversity brings enormous value to a medical school class. And I think that's very difficult to measure, but I think it's very, very palpable. For example, when I was in medical school, I went to Harvard Medical School. And when I was in medical school in my fourth year, one of my classmates invited me over to his apartment for dinner. And my classmate was a Native American and an absolutely outstanding medical student. I met him, his wife, and his little son. And we had dinner, and I asked him, I'm going to call him Dr. K. Dr. K, what are you going to do after Harvard Medical School? You could pretty much go anywhere. He says, I'm going back to the reservation in Arizona to work. And I said, why? Because that area is going to have very few resources. It's going to be difficult for you to advance your career academically, and the compensation may be less. Why are you going to do that? And his answer was, because no one else will. And I find that, I did not go to the reservation to help an area of need. Many other people did not as well, but he had the courage and the willpower to do that. And that's just one example of how a diverse class can give back to the communities they come from and the communities in need. Another example, which I think is important, is I use it as a metaphor to nature. If you look at the shores of Costa Rica, they're invaded by hundreds of thousands of sea turtles every year, and female sea turtles invade the beach and lay hundreds of thousands of eggs into the sand. And by some miracle, which I don't think we understand very well, they all hatch at the same time. And then these tiny baby turtles storm the beach and try to make their way to the ocean. Most of them don't make it. There's lots of predators, seagulls, crabs, animals in the water. But through having a diverse population of sea turtles, the ones with the strongest shells that could run the fastest, swim, be the best swimmers, they survive. And that's possible because they started with a diverse population of turtles. I think if we have a diverse population of physicians, we can attack the future changes in society better. We'll be better prepared to deal with things that are unexpected, things like COVID and pandemics or new diseases or changes in the diseases we have now. Give me a room of many people who have different ways of thinking, coming from different backgrounds. And I think it opens up the doors to thinking possibilities that otherwise would not be there. And I think that's an enormous value in diversity. Unfortunately, like I said, the Supreme Courts have recently ruled that they have basically eliminated affirmative action based on race in the application processes to universities, so that applicants cannot identify themselves as being part of a particular ethnic group. And that just started, and we haven't really seen the effect of that, which will probably be forthcoming in the next couple of years.
Yeah, we'll see what impacts that has. You mentioned a little bit about the future of medicine in general. I want to talk a little bit about the future of medical education. It continues to evolve. What changes do you foresee in medical education in the next decade or so?
Yeah, I think medical education will continue to be, I think, based on humanity. We will always be focused on taking care of people. However, I think it will become more high tech. I think artificial intelligence will enter medical education. I think our ability, the analysis I used before, the drinking of water from a fire hose, I think we will use technology more, less memorization, more critical thinking, problem solving, and use technology to access information much more readily rather than trying to bring it forward from our memory banks. I think that we will, however, always, at least in my lifetime and hopefully in the students' lifetimes, there will be a hands-on experience where physicians visit the patient, talk to the patient, examine the patient. So there's a physical examination, but then we'll be able to supplement that with information which they can gather from basically artificial intelligence. So if a patient comes in with a chief complaint and they have these findings on the history and these other findings on the physical examination, the combination of that information may lead not just to the most common diagnosis, which hopefully the students will know, but that will lead into the second most likely diagnosis, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, which may be readily generated through some type of AI input.
And then for those who are currently preparing to apply to medical school, so these are the kids who have been convinced that medical school is in their future. They're going to go for it. They're getting ready. What is the most important piece of advice that you would give them?
I think students should do their best to perform academically. Although I said that the MCAT score and the GPA is not the entire application, they are important components of the application. So it's important to try to have a good GPA, grade point average, and to perform well on the MCAT examination. But also, it is important to distinguish yourself. No matter what they do in life, we're all unique. And I think it's important to portray that vision of yourself to the person who's reading your application. And you want them to say, you know what? This person, this man or this woman can bring value to our class, and we want them here. And there's lots of different ways of doing that. Uh, Use your counselors, both in the high school and in the college levels. They will guide you in how to distinguish yourselves. I think people sometimes underestimate the input that they could give. These are professionals who help students get admitted to medical school, and they know basically everything that you really need to do to be as competitive as possible.
And then finally, the more personal question of what you would say is the most rewarding aspect of being a physician.
Yeah, the key word in that question, Renee, is rewarding. Success in most Western countries, and I would think certainly in the United States, is mostly measured by gain. And gain in many venues is measured by money. And a lot of people consider themselves successful if they make a lot of money and not successful if they make very little money. In medicine, when you become a physician, when I first looked into being a physician, someone told me it is the most honorable profession. Wasn't quite sure what they meant. I know what it did not mean. It did not mean it was a profession that you made the most money. What was rewarding about becoming a physician was the ability to help others. And not too long ago, I wheeling a patient who's very, very sick in the heart and vascular intensive care unit in the hospital I work in to have very complex open heart surgery. The man in his early 60s, maybe younger, maybe early 50s, if I remember correctly. And as I was wheeling him out of the intensive care unit, I speaking to his wife, I was going out the door. His young daughter must have been 12 or 14, came up to me and pulled on my white coat and said, Dr. Savino, she said, Please bring me my father back. And I said, I'll do my best. So we went to the operating room, and every member in that operating room was charged with saving that person's life and bringing him back to his family. What we did wasn't based on our financial gains or prestige or rank. It was trying to do good. It was trying to relieve pain and reduce suffering and improve the life of an individual. And I think that is the greatest reward one can expect from going into medicine. And that's what I think they meant when I, as a young student or applicant, was told that going into medicine was the most honorable profession. I think that's what they meant.
Thank you for that, Dr. Savino. I really appreciate your time with us on this podcast and sharing these stories of how you got to where you are and how you are working to help others get to where you are in a professional and maybe even a personal way, and in sharing in this wonderful profession that you've chosen for yourself, and one that, yes, has a lot of sacrifices to it, but as you mentioned, a lot of rewards and a lot of fulfillment as a person, as a human being, somebody helping others. So thank you for that. I really do appreciate your time today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And that wraps up our insightful conversation with Dr. Joseph Savino. I hope you found his journey and perspectives as inspiring as I did. His insights on the future of medicine, the importance of mentorship, and the need to diversify and support our future healthcare workforce are truly timely and valuable, especially as we face increasing challenges in the field. If you're a student considering a career in medicine or someone passionate about healthcare, remember that the journey is just as important as the destination, and there's a place for you in shaping the future of this field. Thanks again to Dr. Savino for joining us today, and thank you, our listeners, for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your network, and don't forget to subscribe to the Philly Public Health Chats for more conversations on the pressing health issues of our time. Until next time, stay healthy and stay informed.